Hey folks, this is Fabrice. I've been holding on to this rec for a while, but I wanted to get it out before version 1.0 drops a little bit later this week. The concept of the build is to go into Devourer to pick up Baylor's Eye and see how strong that is. This build is actually something that I wasn't thinking about at all. When Avalon dropped and then when the next balance patches came out, we knew that crit was in a different place. We knew that Shadow Strikes had been adjusted, and I wanted to see how good Shadow Strikes was, and I wasn't really thinking about Baylor's Eye at all. What really tipped me off that Devourer should be on my radar was a video that Pam put out, and I'll put a link of that in the description. So I started recording. This is on June 28th, so a while back. This was the day that the version of the game that we currently have prior to 1.0 came out, and I had a really, really tough recording session. I was trying to do commentary in addition to gameplay at first, and I could tell from my mechanics, I could tell from the fact that I had a headache that it wasn't going to go very well. So I cut the microphone, and then I died twice in the first 6 to 7 minutes of gameplay. Almost quit right there, and then I thought, well, I'll just play it out. I'll use it as a practice run, and it ended up getting to a really interesting place. So a little bit of adversity on this one, but it worked out positively. And another thing about this run is that I tried a different style of editing a little bit. The average Nightmare run for me is about an hour 10. And so this video comes out to under 50 minutes. So I tried to cut more aggressively. I think that's probably better for the viewer. It is a lot more work for me though. So I'd be curious if, as a viewer, do you prefer having more action-packed gameplay, so more like a 45-minute video, or do you prefer like 110, 115, where you get to see every single thing that happens and there's no, gaps, no chronological leaps? So let me know what you think about that. Switching now to talking more about how Devourer feels compared to Shadow Strikes. Let's really start with Shadow Strikes, because Shadow Strikes has been the de facto best Scarlet starting talent for a while. So after the changes to crit went from quests that gave you 25% base crit, and when you consider also that you have 5% crit base on an upgraded character, that means 30% base crit, and then an additional 20% damage on crit. So the crit multiplier at base is 1.5. This would make it 1.7. Also, if you have 100% crit, then all of the crit chance is going to roll over and be added to that crit multiplier, which is important on Scarlet because in human form, the cloaked ability gives the next attack or swift strike 100% crit. So realistically, a lot of that extra crit is actually going to go straight into extra damage. So Shadow Strikes is in a really strong place even now, and it's in a very consistent place. And let's talk maybe some of the math. Like if we want to quantify how much value are you getting from Shadow Strikes, even now after the nerf, well, compare it to grimoires. If you go to a grimoire and you try to get the same amount of crit that you would get from Shadow Strikes from it, well, a green grimoire gives 6% crit chance, a yellow grimoire gives 9% crit chance. And if you're going for critical damage, then a green grimoire gives 20% critical damage, a yellow gives 30, and a red gives 40. So by and large, when you do comparisons, you can think of a green grimoire doing about half of the value of a red grimoire, and then a yellow grimoire is right between them. So Shadow Strikes, when we factor it all in, it's going to give you 15% crit chance after the quest has been done, which is equal to the combined value of a green grimoire and a yellow grimoire, right? Because you get 9 from the yellow grimoire and you get 6 from the green grimoire. And then it's about another green grimoire's worth of value in terms of additional crit damage, because it's 20% additional crit damage. So you can think of a Shadow Strikes common rarity talent. The value that it brings alone to the table is about 3 grimoires, 2 green, 1 yellow. And that is really, really good. Now, that is really insane value. And strictly speaking, of course, there's other things to think about, right? Like if you have Hope Diamond, then you're going to be getting more value from those grimoires. I'm not saying that there's not other factors to consider, but if we just kind of take grimoires at face value and we compare them to the value offered from Shadow Strikes at common rarity, it comes out to being about 2 green grimoires and 1 yellow grimoire. And if you were to go for money instead from those grimoires, a green grimoire is 120 dream shards, a yellow grimoire is 180. So in terms of grimoire value, we're looking at 420 dream shards off of this level 1 common talent. Now, if you have a higher rarity, it does get better, but it's not that great of a return on investment. So for each upgrade level, you're going to get 5 additional crit damage. So it tops out at about 35, actually at exactly 35 additional crit damage. That's a hefty chunk, but if you upgrade a talent from common here in the shop, if you just go ahead and add it all up, that's 350 dream shards. That's a pretty expensive investment. So another thing that's different about the game now is that going to legendaries, upgrading them at the shop isn't as good. And there are things that you can do that are going to make it better. If you're running Hope Diamond, if you're running Golden Egg, it does become a more attractive option. But just in general, upgrading the talent to legendary is not going to be as good for you as maybe it would have been in the past. So looking at that then, in terms of dream shards, Shadow Strikes comes out to about 420 grimoire dream shards worth of value. And let's just, for the sake of it, let's give another example. If we were to do this, try to get to the same values with Aladdin consumables. So we're working with whetstones and 4-leaf clovers. Well, 4-leaf clover gives 3% crit chance, and a whetstone gives 10% crit damage. So a common rarity Shadow Strikes upgrade value in terms of Aladdin consumables is going to be 5 4-leaf clovers and 2 whetstones. And if you had legendary, it's a little bit more, but we'll just dispense with that because we've already established that legendary is kind of, if you get it cheaply, if you kind of have something nice happen, then it's great, but it's not something you're actually going to want to upgrade every time. It gets pretty expensive. So in that case, you're looking at 7 Aladdin consumables worth of value off of the starting level talent on Scarlet, which I think really highlights how tough it is to make that solo build Aladdin crit printer work. You have to have so many leprechaun coins. You have to have Hope Diamond. You really ought to have the super effect from Golden Egg and the stacking effect from it as well. So it's funny to me because we definitely see that build can be really strong, but I just think that it's not going to be something you consistently get to on an Aladdin. And I had a conversation with Positive Ace about this. He plays more Aladdin than me, and he says in solo play, he usually takes the alternative ultimate. He usually doesn't go the crit printer build. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a lot of investment. It's a lot of time and energy. The ceiling is very high, but the percentage of cases where you get to that is relatively low. So bringing it back then to terms of overall numbers, if you're looking at consumables from Aladdin, you're looking at about 1,050 dream shards to match the value of a Scarlet starting talent. Granted, you're going to get some of those for free on Aladdin when you initially pick the ultimate. You're probably going to be running a lot of econ items, but it's still very impressive how much value is coming off of this Shadow Strike starting talent. And that's why it's her best default starting talent. I would say that still for consistency especially, it's really, really good. But if you're looking at the play in the background right now, and I just ate a lot of damage, which obviously it was just a tough day, but you're seeing my damage is really starting to ramp. I'm hitting for hundreds and hundreds of damage. The thing about the Baylor's Eye build is you're going to need some positive things happen. You're going to need some positive outcomes that you can't always guarantee. I got Baylor's Eye from the mini boss. It ended up being 3 rolls. So that is equivalent to a yellow grimoire worth of value just trying to get to that item. I also needed to get some power stacks. So that looks like Flaming Pearls. I needed to get to a decent number of them. But now I'm running 4 charges worth of power, and I have Baylor's Eye, and I did reroll for some of it. So how does it stack up? And this isn't going to be a perfect comparison, but let's say we have 2 level 4 Scarlets, and I did the math here on the side, so just bear with me. At level 4, Scarlet's base power damage is about 53.23, and that's without combo stacks. And each combo stack is going to add about 50% damage. So consider a situation where that we mirror what we're seeing here with the Devourer build in the background. Like we say, okay, relatively similar positive outcomes. So you have a fully combo stacked power that goes off with Shadow Strikes, and it's going to be 250% damage, right? And then because it's going to have a guaranteed crit, the extra crit chance on Shadow Strikes rolls over into the crit multiplier. So 1.5 base plus 0.2 because it's going to be 15 plus the additional 5% that's always going to be the case. And then finally, we have the additional extra crit that comes from the unlocked effect when you finish the quest. Let's be generous and let's assume that we get a higher than average rarity. We have the legendary, so 0.35. So our crit multiplier comes out to 2.05 on a 250% base damage strike. In terms of damage burst, again with the cloaked swift strike, we're now looking at about 272.8 damage. I think the game will display it as 273. Of course, we also have a bunch of Flaming Pearls in this build, so it'd be nice to have something to kind of offset. You know, maybe since we have a legendary, maybe we don't pick up epic items. But let's say we had 3 King of Clubs. So now, in addition to that original amount of damage, we now have a 1.6 multiplier. That's the damage boost in addition. So now, with all of those things in a row on this Shadow Strikes build, this is relatively similar to what we're seeing here in the background. In terms of raw RNG and how it came together, we're looking at about a 436.5% damage burst. Really a lot of damage. And it's not going to be unreliable because you're not depending on getting a Devourer proc, because Devourer is unreliable until you have the legendary on it. But it's still an interesting comparison right now. Well, okay, let's go ahead and let's talk about the Baylor's Eye damage that we're going to be able to see on this build a little bit prior to where we are right now. Let's say again, level 4. So we have 53.23 base power damage. We have our combo stacks, so that's going to be an additional 150% damage. We have Baylor's Eye, and we have these 3 pearls. So it ends up being 100% plus 4 extra 150, right? Because one of those is going to be for combo stacks, and the other 3 are all pearls. So that comes out to 700% damage. And then we have the Devourer quest, which is going to give us a 1.1% multiplier. And then with a cloak strike, so guaranteed crit, we end up with a 1.55% crit multiplier. Well, that ends up being a pretty hefty chunk of damage. It's more damage. It's 635.3. But of course, it's not quite as reliable. So it's going to be really important on this build to get the Devourer online. And the thing that really makes this build a factor, really makes it interesting, is that the Devourer effect that it gives you back the power, refunds the power cooldown if you get a kill, is guaranteed at legendary, and it affects all of the stacks. So we will get back up to 4 stacks, or however many pearls and raven effigies and super effects that we will get all of that back. So now that we kind of have an idea of how these match up, I think that the Devourer build might have, like, it's obvious that both can have really high burst, And the nice thing about the Shadow Strikes is that you don't have to guarantee a kill to get the damage. But you can do really, really well with this Baylor's Eye power stacking build. And each step that you get from it is really good value. You compare this to what you're getting on an Ace of Spades or a King of Clubs. Both of those are quite good, right? They're good items. But if you get one pearl, you're getting 150% damage instead of that percentage multiplier. It's applied in a different place because in terms of the damage equation, the pearl is going to be applied to the first part of the equation, whereas the special the power is going to be applied to the multiplier on the other side. But it is a really interesting build path. And it's going to get better if you start stacking if you start stacking other items that are good with it. Like obviously that King of Clubs that we discussed, that's going to be a really nice multiplier. Now, going back to the build that's playing out in the background, and this is a funny fight because despite the fact that I have crazy burst, I'm fighting crabs, and crabs take all damage and turn it to nothing. So, lovely crab moment in the background. But I'm kind of doing weird things with the itemization here. At this point, I had run a lot of builds that were very crit-centric, and I had gotten kind of bored with it. So I'm picking up Dragon Hide, Green Armor, an Ogre's Blood here, kind of a random one that it makes sense because I have a Philosopher's Stone. But I think I skip on some things. If you watch back and you look at the items, I skip on some things that seem really, really good. I think there are a couple things in play there. I think that the green armor makes sense because I know that my mechanics today have been atrocious. And now that I have Baylor's Eye and the build is starting to go somewhere, I want a little bit more of a guarantee that I'm going to survive. And there's also kind of a question of how much damage is too much damage, because at some point, is it more value to keep on getting more and more damage, or is it more value to get some survivability because you know that you can manage what you're fighting with the damage you have? Now, I don't think I'm really there. I think that I could pack on a little bit more damage and it would be nice. But I can appreciate the philosophy here, or I think the decisions, although they're not strictly optimal, I understand them in the context of the day that I was having and the runs that I had previously. Upgrade the rarity a little bit on Devourer. I'm still trying to get the legendary unlock. That's one of the big challenges here. You can't really guarantee that you're going to get like a good dream that's going to take care of the expense of getting the legendary on Devourer. To be honest, I need to look better at how the respec and also how the dream that upgrades a talent all the way, how those work, because I've always been cautious of taking those, not really understanding how they work. But I've seen some really cool plays that you can do, like getting the respec early. You get a high rarity starting talent, but it's not the optimal talent, and then you take the respec and then you get the high rarity on the talent you wanted. That's a really cool thing that I did not know you could do. I saw that recently on a Positive Ace stream, or on video, I guess it wasn't the stream. And then it looks to me from, again, watching other people play, which I don't do as much as I maybe should, because there's a lot to learn from just watching how another player approaches the game. It looks as though the dream that gives you an instant legendary on one of your talents defaults to a low upgraded talent. And I didn't realize that. I thought that sometimes you could get shafted. But I'm not confident, I guess, on how that works, and that's something that I'd be curious. If someone knows in the comments, that'd be fun for my benefit. I do go energy here. This is going to stack really well synergistically with what I'm doing. Energy is different. it's harder to stack, right? Because Murderous Intent no longer gives you all of the stacks. It only gives you 2. Energy also gives less crit overall. Now it's going to be sick value here if I can get the stacks up, because that multiplier is going to be applied to the product of A and B in the damage calculation equation. So because I have like 700 base damage, that's really nice. I blow all my cooldowns there, by the way. But it's going to be hard to get those stacks up consistently. I think that energy is not nearly as high priority as it was prior to Avalon. Now that you don't have that really nice Murderous Intent synergy. The crabs in chapter 2, this is my nemesis, and it's really hard too with a build like this. I think crabs are especially bad for this Devourer build because it revolves around getting those resets, and you can't just strike a crab. You have to get it on its back before you can hope to get resets. It looks like I'm doing okay on that aspect, and I'm able to get the special off to do some work for me. I'm already doing 2.6 damage Shadow Strikes. And this build is so much better when you get it off on Scarlet compared to Wolf form. In general, I think that's kind of the way it is. I love Wolf form. Wolf form is so cool, but at high difficulty, it's just very obvious how much better the human aspect of her kit is compared to the wolf aspect. I think that makes sense though, because the wolf is big and tanky and gets armor when you pop your defense, when you pop Howl. So much of the character design is tied up in trying to get to trying to be survivable and being able to tank. And whenever you add difficulty and damage and scaling to your enemies, and you have this big hitbox that is really easy to get picked off on, it's going to affect these characters that just rely on basic stats instead of dodging. So it's kind of unfortunate. I do like the wolf a lot, but wolf is not going to help you out when you're stacking on challenge modifiers. If you're interested in the conversation around Scarlet and packing on challenge modifiers, by the way, Positive Ace has done some really challenging runs where that he's beaten the game on really, really high difficulties with Scarlet. I saw he had a run not too long ago. It's a Scarlet Nightmare run with Dry Fountains, Berserk Foes, Disease, Corruption, and Angry Birds. If you aren't familiar with those, Dry Fountains means that none of the fountains on the map have anything in them, so you can't get healing that way or vitality that way. Berserk Foes means that the enemies are going to do more damage the more damage they are. So if an enemy is almost out of HP, they're going to do more damage. I can't remember what the base numbers are there, but it's more. Disease means that you're going to heal less. I think it's 50% less. And then Corruption means that all the enemies are going to spawn corrupted. So all of that, I think all 4 of those disproportionately are negative for Scarlet. She's a melee survivor. Melee survivors are expected to take more damage, so they need to sustain from fountains more than ranged survivors. Not survivors, I guess, but characters. A little bit of Risk of Rain 2 came through there for a second. But they need it more. And then Berserk Foes, you're in close. Your wolf form has an identity that revolves around taking damage and life stealing. And then Disease, obviously, that's a huge detriment to your damage, to your life steal. And then Corruption, everything, literally everything. Well, you touch it once and then you burst. You get popped like a balloon. So that's a really challenging run. And then you have Angry Birds, which is pretty much going to be equivalent on every character, just no Raven Feathers. And Positive Ace did it, and I am jealous because I like to think that I've done a lot of variety and different things on Scarlet, and I am really scared of checking out that challenge on Scarlet. But we'll see what the future holds, and we'll see about this update. This, by the way, this is when I kind of went mad with power. As you can see, I was able to one-shot all of these targets. And something that was on my mind is usually the way that we scale in Ravenswatch is we focus on points of interest. But because I'm so strong that I can one-shot these, I thought, well, can I just focus on farming XP? Because these fights are so much more efficient for me than they would usually be. So as you can see here, I'm getting hundreds of XP every kill. But at level 8, the scaling is fairly severe. You know, we need 18,000 before we hit level 9. So in the end, I would say you probably still only want to fight over shards. I don't think just fighting to fight is good, even when you can pretty reliably one-tap enemies. There was another thing. In that fight, I didn't have to stack very much because I had so much base damage. And then I hit a null captain, and I did lose my stacks. One of the things that helps me out a little bit is that I am running 1 stack of Ravenclaw. And so even when I have those moments when I mess up and I don't get the kill that I wanted, I still have a relatively... it's not too bad of a problem. I recover fairly quickly from that kind of mistake. I almost have green armor up now. Look at that. That's neat. But yeah, it's nice to have. It's a little bit annoying because it means that if I get an epic duplication from the shop, that it might go to Ravenclaw. But if I get the super effective Ravenclaw, it's actually just power has plus 40% damage, which would be great for me. So I think that item fits pretty well into this build. It's not going to do as much for me in the happy case, but it's going to be good for me in the more consistent case. This boss fight is going to go really well for me, obviously, but I also want to talk just a second. If you look at the map, I still have a decent amount of it that I didn't explore yet. We see that there's a mini boss that I wasn't able to take. Didn't find the key somehow, although it looks like I checked most of the places where it should have been. The thing to realize that is that because I was trying to farm XP, I was trying to be a little unorthodox there. It meant that there were times when I could have been taking a point of interest where I was just fighting random stuff. Now, that was neat. That was fun to be able to just go and take out all the eyes in one go. Really, that was pretty fun. But yeah, going back to how my chapter 2 went, I'd say that the first 2/3 of my chapter 2 were pretty good, but I should have been playing around points of interest to really maximize my scaling. And so that was a bit of a miss by me. Now in the shop, chapter 3, we see we have some items, we have some talent upgrades. I definitely am going to want to get that epic duplication. I'm thinking in terms of what I was probably looking for, I was probably really hoping to get the effect on a pearl. But as I look back on it, I wouldn't have hated it on that Ravenclaw. And if I had gotten 2 Ravenclaws here, then that would have been really good. There are some good super effects. Another item that would be really good is Eternal Rose. And maybe actually, let's talk about at this stage, what are the best things that can happen for my build in terms of damage production, which I haven't always been prioritizing. But we obviously have the vitality route, but let's talk about, like, in terms of the equation, there's 3 stats that we can control. There's the A, which is our stat, the percentage part where that Baylor's Eye is doing work. There's the bonus, which is more so what King of Clubs would help with, or damage stats help with. That's where those are calculated. And there's the critical chance. So those are the 3 ones we can talk about for a second. As I get each pearl, the question is, do I get as much value right now from a pearl? Because I already have a whole lot of stacks of pearls at this point. Do I get as much value from a pearl as I would get from, say, a good rare, like King of Clubs, or even maybe some damage from Ogre's Blood? Well, I did the math here, and this is a little bit more generalized. So we're no longer calculating level. I'm just thinking of it in terms of percentages. So if my current situation, my current build, I have 700% damage and a 1.1 damage multiplier, which would reflect, by the way, the damage from the Devourer quest. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. I have 71% damage in this build, but if it were in that more default case, like the concept is still solid. And then we have just the regular crit multiplier, which will be 1.5 on the crit. 1.55 can be guaranteed right now because of 1.55 can be guaranteed right now because of cloaked. So, and we have some energy and some other things affecting that, but like in terms of the proportions, they should all be the same. So how much value do we get if we compare a Flaming Pearl to a King of Clubs head to head? Well, the Flaming Pearl equation looks like 850 instead of that 700% times 1.1 times 1.55. So it comes out to about 1,450% damage, just slightly a hair under that. So compare that to a King of Clubs. Well, that multiplier will go to the damage multiplier, so B, and that will be 700 because like we're assuming that pearl is, no we're comparing them. So this is a case without the pearl. No pearl, so 700% times 1.3 times 1.55, and that's going to be about 1410%. So it's worse than a pearl. It's not bad though. It's almost as much damage, but it does show that just because we've stacked those pearls a lot, they're not like losing their proportional value. It's still a really meaty chunk of damage that's being done. And just to give an extra little bit of nuance to this, let's say that instead of going for a damage, just a straight up damage increase in that category, let's say we were looking at something that's going to affect our crit. So say if I'd gotten that yellow grimoire on chapter 2 that I skipped, then and say we got crit damage on it, so we're looking at 30% additional crit damage. That takes the crit multiplier up from 1.55 to 1.95, and then we're doing almost 1700 percent damage on a hit. So crit at this point is definitely the way to go to maximize my damage. Now, of course, that's guaranteeing the crit. That's not going to be possible all the time, particularly when I'm playing with Wolf. So take that with a grain of salt. But there's also a lot of things in the game to, like my base crit chance is, I guess it's only 5. But if I were taking Eternal Rose and I had additional crit on dashes, that would be really strong. And if I were picking it up from grimoires, then that would be really strong as well. I haven't done all the math here. If you a while back, and this was before the changes to Aladdin, I was working on a video that would have dealt with how well consumables scale, and from that video, I found if you compare like a silver bullet's value, old school silver bullet, to the crit path, which is going to be whetstones and four-leaf clovers, the silver bullet actually has better value on average damage than the bullet, than the combination of whetstones and four-leaf clovers until you get to 11 consumables. So once you reach that tipping point, that's where critical chance is going to start to outshine flat damage bonuses. If you look at this build, my crit is not in a very developed place. I guess I have energy, which is a decent amount. Being Scarlet, I also have a whole lot of crit on the cloak, which is going to be really strong, but that's only going to be on our human side, and we turn into a wolf sometimes. So that's something to bear in mind. But if I had played for more grimoires, then it's possible I would have hit the tipping point. I would have been a little bit closer to maximizing damage from that. I was also looking at the build. and in referring back to the problem that I was having early, that I was taking a lot of damage and my mechanics were feeling really, really sloppy, I took a lot of these green armors, and I was obviously hoping for the synergy with Dragonhide. Dragonhide is one of these interesting items because its base effect isn't great, but its super effect is actually really, really cool. And it combines well with a lot of different things in really interesting ways. And so I was really hoping for a good combination there that I didn't get to. I don't think I did. I guess I'm not dead certain, but I don't think I got to the Dragonhide synergy. That would have been a big damage boost. But even without it, the armor is nice. Armor obviously, with green armor particularly, it's going to be more raw armor stacks, but they're going to each be less effective the more you have. So if you think about, if you do the math, and I have it written down over here, if you do the math, the first 50 armor gives you 33% damage reduction. And that's huge. That's a percentage damage mitigation, just flat. It's fantastic. And then at 200, I think at 150 it's going to be 60%. At 200 it's going to be 66. So about 66, about a 2/3 damage block. And then at 300 it's going to be 75. Each of those steps is a lot of damage to think about, to have all pile up. And so it's not as worth it to continue to stack on continue to stack on armor past, I think, about 50. I think that 50 is kind of that magic place that pretty much every build should try to have that much armor. And then past 50 armor, if you're taking it, then maybe you have like a lot of things that are going to interact positively with green armor, so you know that you can just get a whole lot for free. But I imagine that to really justify that investment, you need Dragonhide or maybe Bloody Mary's Mirror. That's another one. That's another really fun way to do it. But coming back to, I guess, the topic of how to maximize the armor of the build at this point, getting the vulnerability on my dash here from the item is a really big deal, because in addition to A times B times C, the best way to continue to build damage would be to modify status effects. And I've done a video on status effects before. They're not in the damage calculation equation that Past Tech gave us. Like it doesn't have any training wheels that's like, by the way, vulnerable is applied a different way. So you can think of vulnerable and of marked as being an additional step in that equation, right? And I've made a whole video on this before, but the thing is, the rest of the things in like if I get additional pearl stacks, if I get additional King of Clubs, if I get additional damage, it's all going to be calculated in that A times B times C. But those numbers are not quite as chunky as if I get these status effects, particularly because it works on armored targets. And if you remember in chapter 2, that was one of the things that the build was running into, was a difficulty dealing with crabs, because crabs will turn a big burst of damage into just one damage. So I really did need something better there. It would have been nice to have something better there. And now that I have all of that to cut through armor, if you look at this, I have vulnerability and I have marked. So right now when I hit that spider, it has a 50% damage reduction. I am doing full damage to it. Same with this knight. Same with everything except mini bosses, crabs, and major bosses. They all have a little bit more armor, either 75 or 100% damage mitigation. But yeah, now that I've come this far and I have no more dream stars of fate, so you can tell this is the curse of every chapter 3 run, I feel, is that you you get into a pretty good place, but each subsequent item, each subsequent pickup has a lower and lower possibility of being something that you can use, and you don't have rerolls to fix it if it's not what you wanted. And you can see the hard tough time I'm having accepting that I can't have nice things here. I have to accept that some of the things I'm about to pick up are just not going to be good. But if you look at the map, coming back to how, remember like at the end of chapter 2, I had gotten into a really strong state, but I wasted a lot of time picking random fights to see if I could do some cheeky XP scaling thing. Now I tightened it up a little bit. I prioritized the right camps, and I've pretty much finished the whole map, or I'm going to be able to finish the whole map, with the exception of getting every single item out of the well, which is, fairly negligible. It's a little funny. Come to think of it, reflecting on this, maybe it would have been cooler to have not taken these, because then the bosses would have had more HP and I could have played around with them a little bit more and tried to maximize my damage numbers. But at this point, it's kind of academic. I'm very much in control. I'm almost level 13. That Tomato Baka would have been nice 5 minutes ago, but there's no real uncertainty right now. I'm just going to go and I'm going to play with the bosses a little bit. I'm also running 200 armor on top of everything else, so I'm very survivable. About the only way that this could go wrong would be if I got overconfident and I got one-tapped by a boss. And this is cool too, because when I changed forms here, I got a reset on the ability, and I'm also getting to fight the bosses before they split apart, so I get more value than I would otherwise. I don't actually manage to finish them both off here in one phase. I think I rushed it a little bit. I probably should have farmed more combo stacks, but I'm not under any real stress. And that's how this works. This is a very fun one. I really enjoyed playing this build, and it was nice. It was a nice find. I'm glad that Pam showed it off and got it on my radar. I don't think it's as consistent as Shadow Strikes to go for this, but I think the ceiling is very respectable, and I really enjoyed the build and the direction. That's all for this one. We'll see if this survives the new patch, the 1.0 update. But till next time, y'all. Appreciate it, and catch you later.